With Pantech gone, South Korea is just left with two notable smartphone manufacturers. You have LG and Samsung. They're now considered crosstown rivals. Now, Samsung took a decisive step forward with the S6, dashing any concerns about the company's place in industry. While LG too has been keeping itself busy for the G4, they've addressed similar issues and put a greater emphasis on camera performance and screen quality. So, which one of these has the upper hand then? Hey guys, John V from PhoneArena here, and you're watching our video comparison between the LG G4 and the Samsung Galaxy S6. Retro chic leather or the slightly colder embrace of modernistic metal and glass? You pick your poison. We probably will never know for sure whether LG had planned it all along or if it were simply a response to the more premium Galaxy S flagship, but it definitely upped its game with the G4. Sure, the normal model still has a plastic body, but the more premium leather version is definitely up to snuff, and it's a very adequate answer to the S6. Turning to ergonomics, there's no contest. Being the considerably smaller device, the Galaxy S6 is easily the more comfortable phone to use single-handedly. This is mostly attributed to the G4's larger screen, which we'll touch base on in a bit, though the fact that LG's new flagship is actually bulkier than its predecessor is not helping matters either. The most shocking difference between the two heavy hitters, however, is just thickness. The Galaxy S6 is significantly thinner than the G4. Both companies decided to stick to their guns and refused to tweak the size of the display panels they chose for their respective flagships. So, like the S5 and G3 last year, we again have a 5.1-inch screen facing a larger 5.5-inch unit. There's only one change here, and that's Samsung upped the ante and joins the Quad HD resolution club. The two configs work out to a pixel pitch of 577 pixels per inch for the S6 and 538 pixels per inch for the G4. It's really more than you need. The G4's new IPS quantum display is overly cold with a measured color temperature of 8,000 Kelvin, whereas the S6 is at the almost perfect 6,600 Kelvin temperature. This disparity extends to the color reproduction as well, where the G4 is visibly oversaturated at higher intensities. In contrast, the Galaxy S6 tends to stick to the sRGB color space. Moving on, the S6 is also ahead in terms of brightness output, with a measured luminance of 563 nits, which is a great figure. Meanwhile, the G4 peaks at 454 nits, which is still decent. Aesthetically and functionally, little about LG's custom interface changed from what we had with the G3. We're again looking at the same flat approach to design, though the company isn't running off in its own direction, and it's keeping close to Google's established material design guidelines. Samsung went down a similar path with the new TouchWiz overlay of the S6, though there are some very important differences here. For starters, while design is again mostly unchanged with the exception of being in the conformance of Lollipop style, the software has been genuinely trimmed down and simplified. Both devices have their respective takes on mini apps, the now trending theming with a dedicated store, and also enhanced multitasking. Although they share the same features, Samsung does it a little bit better. Case in point, there's more skin done to the native apps with its themes. It also has a deeper third-party support with its multi-window feature, and one-handed mode works pretty well. LG did something quite interesting with the G4. It dropped Qualcomm's octa-core Snapdragon 810, even though it made use of it with the G Flex 2, and instead picked the hexa-core Snapdragon 808. On Samsung's end, we're looking at an equally intriguing decision. The S6 dumps Qualcomm and instead picks its own octa-core Exynos 7420 processor. Benchmarks certainly agree that it outdoes the LG G4 in terms of raw computing might and graphics performance, but it's something we also notice in day-to-day use. As for storage, the S6 comes in 32, 64, or 128GB capacities, but while the G4 is only available with 32GB of storage, it's complemented by its microSD card slot. LG used a 16-megapixel sensor complete with a very wide f1.8 aperture lens, an LED flash, an ambient light sensor, and a laser autofocus system. As for Samsung, we're also looking at a 16-megapixel sensor complemented by an LED flash and face detection autofocus. To top it off, both companies implement an iOS gizmo for shake-free video and better stills with the main camera. Lastly, if you need selfies, you're looking at an 8-megapixel front-facing camera with the G4 and a slightly less generous 5-megapixel one with the S6. On the software side, we have an equally impressive development as both LG and Samsung have refreshed their existing interfaces in different ways. While the S6 boasts a new Pro mode, which gives you access to various controls, it doesn't offer the shutter speed control found with the GeForce manual mode. For the most part, the two snappers produce equally competitive outdoor stills that are well exposed, rich in detail, and true to life. Similarly, indoor shots are quite comparable between the two, with only tiny wins for either here and there for the Galaxy S6. For example, it seems better ensuring that images are focused properly, while G4 turns out a teeny bit more detail. Under low light, the G4 is an amazing performer. Not only is its photos better focused and plentiful with detail, but anti-noise algorithms smooth over the image with surgical precision, even when shooting at higher ISO than the S6. If there's one thing both LG and Samsung have always done a great job of, it's the built-in multimedia app stack. Not only are the default apps more than sufficient for the majority of potential users, but they can even satisfy some niche uses and keep you firmly entrenched in Samsung LG land. Speaking of video, both devices have extra features that make consumption more pleasurable. For example, you can lock the screen to accidental touches with both, and you can even pop out the player and put it into a smaller overlaid window that follows you throughout the interface. The sound coming out of the speakers of both devices is more than adequate too, though the G4's peak of 79 decibels exceeds that of the S6's mark of 73.7 decibels. Average, decent, but unimpressive. These are some of the adjectives we'd use when talking about the LG G4 and the Galaxy S6's earpieces and noise cancellation microphones. This has been the case for a long while now. Few devices ever come close to the heavyweights like the HTC One series, but it is what it is. Packing a 3000 mAh battery, we were hoping that the G4 would prove to be more of a resilient device thanks to further optimizations, but the scores from our benchmark tests disagree. It gets an unimpressive 6 hours and 6 minutes. Given its considerably smaller 2550 mAh battery, you expect the Galaxy S6 to bomb on the test even more spectacularly. However, Samsung's skinny flagship managed to turn out a decent 7 hours and 14 minutes, putting an hour worth of distance between itself and its neighborhood rival. If you kept score, you'd know which way we're leaning right now. The Galaxy S6 snagged more wins on the way, earning itself a lead on the G4. This doesn't come without a lengthy, maybe even a patronizing disclaimer that makes it sufficiently clear that you should try and identify the things you care about instead of following along blindingly. This means deciding whether you want a phablet-sized phone or one that is easier to handle. It also means asking yourself if that extra frame will really make a difference with gaming. It means finding out whether metal and glass designs are your thing or whether you prefer the warm touch of leather instead. In the end, both devices are truly great enough that neither can be the wrong choice.